They thought they could study you like a pattern on glass, as if every scar could be measured, as if every silence had a name. But you became something science couldn't dissect, something rules couldn't hold. You bled through their logic. You broke through their theories. They called it madness, but it was mastery wearing a cracked smile. You learned that survival isn't about fighting. It's about folding the pain into something they can't touch. You built armor from every doubt they threw at you. You stitched it together with every word they said you'd never become. And when they looked again, they didn't see a survivor. They saw a phenomenon they couldn't predict. Every move you made was a whisper in chaos, a misdirection, a glitch in their system. You weren't defending anymore. You were designing. Every fall was just a recalibration. Every silence was a move. They tried to analyze your peace, not knowing it was war in disguise. You didn't rise for applause. You rose because you were tired of being understood by small minds. You became a study in control. Every breath deliberate, every glance a mirror. They saw the reflection, but not the mind behind it. You became what they feared, unreadable, untouchable, unstoppable. And now, they're documenting you, writing pages about how you move, how you think, how you recover. They call it a defense strategy. You call it evolution. You became the formula, the case study, the silence that rewrote the rules. They can't copy what they can't comprehend. That's your edge. That's your poetry. They tried to define you, and you turned definition into destruction. They kept watching, counting your moves, mapping your habits like scientists desperate to find the flaw. But you moved like smoke. You became rhythmless. You became art. They tried to measure your steps, but every time they blinked, you were gone. Patterns belong to the predictable. You became the exception that rewrote the equation. You started playing a different game. No rules, no fairness, just instinct sharpened by betrayal. You made unpredictability your crown. While they played checkers, you were rewriting the board mid-game. They called you reckless. But reckless is just what control looks like to the untrained eye. You weren't chasing victory. You were studying chaos until it obeyed you. Every hesitation was intentional. Every mistake was planned. You built misdirection into your bloodstream. They saw a stumble. You saw an opening. You turned confusion into choreography. You made losing look like art. That's why they never understood how you kept winning when everything looked broken. They whisper your name now, quietly, like superstition. They study your timing, your tone, your patience. They're trying to decode a language that doesn't use words because you stopped explaining yourself long ago. You let your silence do the heavy lifting. You became a paradox wrapped in calm. And the truth? You enjoy it. Watching them guess, watching them copy the outer shell without touching the inner fire. They can't duplicate what's built in pain. They can't mimic what's born in solitude. You're not their lesson. You're their reminder that genius often wears the mask of madness. They thought pain would end you, break you, humble you into silence. But pain doesn't destroy, it instructs. Every blow rewired your senses. Every disappointment sharpened your edge. You stopped asking why me and started asking what now. That's the moment the world lost its power over you. Pain turned from punishment into precision, into a mentor that spoke only in scars. You learned things textbooks could never teach. How to breathe when everything inside you screams. How to smile when chaos burns around you. Pain became your syllabus and endurance your diploma. You studied in the dark where no applause could reach you. You found out that comfort never builds character. It softens it. Pain, it carves. Every wound became an instruction manual. It whispered truths no calm day ever could. That emotion isn't weakness. It's data. That heartbreak isn't failure. It's calibration. You learn to listen between the cracks. You learn to rebuild without noise. You learn to stand not because it was easy, but because collapse was boring. And that's the secret. You stopped fearing the hit. You started welcoming it. Because pain doesn't visit the weak. It visits those who still have something left to shape. You turned agony into architecture. Every tear a blueprint. Every bruise a reminder. You weren't breaking. You were forming. Now they study how you survived. They call it endurance. You call it adaptation. They see scars, you see scripture written in resilience. You didn't escape the pain, you translated it. And now they quote your suffering like it's a science. Silence, the weapon they never saw coming. You mastered it, not out of fear, but precision. You learned that words reveal too much, and noise dilutes power. While they shouted to be seen, you stayed still to be remembered. You turned quiet into control. Every pause became a blade, every breath a calculation. You weren't avoiding conflict, you were setting the stage for dominance. They wanted reaction. You gave them reflection. They wanted chaos. You gave them calm. You learned that rebellion doesn't always roar. It often whispers. You became a protest wrapped in poise, while others burned bridges for attention. You built empires in the dark. Your silence didn't mean surrender. It meant strategy. Every second you didn't speak, they exposed themselves. Their insecurity echoed louder than your calm ever could. You made them uncomfortable with your composure. They started questioning themselves before you even moved. That's power. That's control. You don't fight the storm, you become the stillness that unnerves. And that's what drives them mad. They can't track a ghost. They can't argue with silence. They call it arrogance. You call it awareness. You know when to act, when to wait, when to strike. Your rebellion isn't chaos. It's orchestration, a symphony of patience and poise that only the disciplined can hear. You realized something brutal and beautiful. The loud rarely lead. The quiet create the map. While they performed their anger, you mastered your timing. You didn't need to shout for power. You made power lean in to listen. That's the art they'll never teach, because only the self-made can speak it. They watched you like predators watch prey, eyes full of judgment, waiting for your next move. But you didn't flinch. You didn't rush. You waited, because patience is what separates the loud from the lethal. You understood what they never will. Timing is the quietest form of power. Every second you stayed still, they got restless. Every silence you held became pressure they couldn't handle. You weren't waiting out of fear. You were studying, watching their patterns, their habits, their pride. You learned how they breathe when they lie, how they smirk when they think they've won. You learned the rhythm of arrogance and how to interrupt it with precision. You didn't need speed. You needed accuracy. And when the time came, you didn't hesitate. Patience turned you into a mirror. They saw themselves in your calm and couldn't stand it. They thought you were weak for not reacting. But reaction is for the predictable. You built power by withholding it. You let their assumptions become their undoing. They talked too soon. You listened too long. And that's how you won. Because waiting isn't weakness. It's warfare in slow motion. It's understanding that stillness doesn't mean still. It means ready. You were never behind. You were observing the battlefield, counting every breath before the strike. You turned the waiting into weaponry. You let the silence grow teeth. Now they wonder how you knew, how you saw the end before they made the first move. Simple. You waited, and in that wait they revealed everything. You didn't need to guess. You just needed to stay. That's the discipline they'll never master. The calm before control. They thought they broke you. They smiled when you fell. They whispered it's over. but they didn't know you were studying the ground. You turned defeat into disguise. You learned to fall so quietly that even failure forgot your name. You played weak to watch the predators celebrate too early. You gave them illusion, and they took the bait. That's not loss, that's design. You discovered the beauty of pretending to lose, because in the illusion of collapse, you find truth. When everyone leaves, you see who's real. When everything burns, you see what's worth rebuilding. You learned that defeat doesn't destroy, it disinfects. It clears the noise, the fakes, the weight. What's left after that? Just you, sharper than before. They didn't realize you were documenting their reactions, their smirks, their arrogance, their comfort. Every laugh became evidence. Every word became insight. You turned their victory into your case study. They thought you were done, but you were just collecting data for your return. That's the genius of controlled failure. You stopped fearing rock bottom because you built a throne there. You made defeat your works while they let evade your silence. You rebuilt your empire beneath their noise. You learned to smile while plotting resurrection. And when you rose, they couldn't process it. How could they? They mistook your patience for pain, your stillness for surrender. And that's your master, the illusion of defeat. You didn't lose, you lewd. You didn't fall, you observed. You didn't crumble, you calculated. You became the paradox they'll never decode, the one who won by pretending to break. They tried to storm you, to breach your walls with noise, doubt, and expectation. But you built walls they could not climb. Not with force, not with fear. You built them with discipline, with silence, with the sharp understanding that control begins in the mind. Your mind became steel, quiet, unshakable, unbreachable, a place they could never enter. They don't see it. They think walls are barriers, but yours were gates. Every thought you guarded was an arsenal. Every idea locked was a weapon. You didn't just protect your mind, you cultivated it. You made it a temple of strategy. Every brick placed with intention. Every stone forged in solitude. They could look, but they could never touch. You learned that strength isn't about holding ground. It's about owning it. They tried to plant doubt in your fortress. You let them, because doubt is a test of walls. You let noise pass through without letting it settle. You didn't just survive the siege. You thrived inside it. The more they attacked, the stronger you became. And they wondered why you never broke. Why their best blows felt like whispers against stone. They forgot the real war is fought inside. You mastered your mind, you turned it into a labyrinth, and they lost themselves before they could even enter. That's why they study you now, not because they defeated you, but because they can't. They can't map what can't be touched. They can't understand a fortress built in silence and steel. You became the blueprint of defense, not walls but mind. They spoke loud, reckless, certain, and you listened, not to answer, not to react, but to learn, to take their words apart like clockwork, to strip meaning until all that was left was truth. You turned understanding into power, not empathy, not weakness, but strategy. You became fluent in their motives, their fears, their illusions. They didn't know you were taking notes. Every glance, every hesitation, every slip of voice. They thought it was idle attention, but it was your armory being built. Understanding is not peace. It's dominance disguised. You saw the strings in their chaos. You learned to pull them quietly, to turn their strength into your leverage without them realizing. You understood that knowledge is sharper than violence, that insight is heavier than power, You turned their language into your tool, their arrogance into your map, their doubt into your guide. They became your case study, and from that study you built something no force could resist: control. And they never saw it coming, because understanding is invisible. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It moves inside the mind before the body reacts. They were loud, you were silent. They acted, you designed. They tried to fight, you already owned the battlefield. That's why they call you a mystery, a blueprint they can't copy. You turned listening into warfare. You turned insight into armor. You built a weapon they can't see, and that weapon is you. They throw storms at you, loud winds, heavy blows, and you stand still, not out of ignorance, not out of weakness, but because you chose not to react. Every flinch is a map for them. Every tremor is a clue. You gave them nothing. You became the still point in their chaos, the silence, that unsettled noise itself. They can't break what doesn't move. They watch you like scholars of the unknown, recording your silence as if it were a lesson. They study your calm like it's a language. They dissect your poise like it's a formula. And in doing so, they prove your power, because they can't imitate it. You aren't a strategy they can steal. You are a condition they cannot create. You learned that courage isn't noise. It's stillness in the face of ruin. A quiet that eats doubt alive. You made fortitude a performance of silence, a theater of control where they are only spectators. They want your reaction. You give them nothing but observation, and that is the sharpest cut of all. They began to wonder if you feel at all, if you fear at all, and that uncertainty became your crown. They can't crack your armor because you built it without sound. They can't provoke your collapse because you collapsed years ago and learned to rise without warning. That's why they document you, not to understand, but to imitate, not to defeat, but to explain. You became the case they couldn't solve, the blueprint they will never master, and that truth burns louder than any victory. They thought they were studying defense. They called it strategy. They wrote volumes. But you called it transformation. You became the map without a path, the answer without a question, the silence that rewrote the war. You didn't defend yourself. You redesigned what defense even meant. You didn't survive. You evolved. Every move you made became a lesson they tried to capture. Every breath became a theory they tried to name. But you are not a chapter. You are the whole book, a living code, an architecture of endurance. They study your patterns because they know you are not an accident. You are a blueprint. You mastered the art of being unknowable. You became a paradox they cannot solve. You turned wounds into wisdom, silence into strategy, doubt into discipline. They can't copy it because it was never theirs to learn. You built it inside yourself, in solitude, in patience, in pain. And now they document you, not because they understand, but because they fear what they can't. They try to replicate your but they forget the blueprint isn't in the moves. It's in the mind, and your mind is forever unreadable. So stand, quiet, unshaken. Let them study your silence. Let them call it chaos. Let them write books about it. You are no longer a strategy. You are the standard, the blueprint, and that is your final victory. They think silence is surrender, that stillness is weakness, but you know the truth. Silence is the loudest rebellion. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it consumes. Every quiet moment became a message. Every pause became an army. You learned that the absence of noise can speak louder than 1,000 battles. Silence became your war cry. They don't understand it. They can't measure it. They can't write it into their books. They try to translate it into noise, but noise is their language, not yours. You speak in in calm, in precision. They hear your silence and panic because it reflects their own chaos. They fear what they can't control, and silence controls everything. You learn to wield stillness like a blade, not to harm but to shift, to break expectation, to draw them into your rhythm without them knowing it. Silence became not an absence of sound, but a presence of power, a force they could not defy. You weaponized restraint. You mastered control. You became the storm without movement, They watch, they study, they imitate, but they can't replicate it. Because silence isn't a tactic. It's a state of being, and you are the embodiment of it. Every unspoken word a lesson, every held breath a declaration, every still second a strike. They never see coming, and that's why they fear you. Not because they know your strategy, but because they can't hear it. They can't predict it. They can't stop it. You became the silence that speaks louder than war. They will write about you, in books, in whispers, in theories they can't prove. They'll try to name what you became, but names are chains. You are no chain. You are a movement, a shadow in history, a lesson in control. They won't remember the battles. They will remember the silence after them. That silence will be your legacy. Every scar you carry becomes a chapter. Every moment of stillness becomes a verse. Every calculated move becomes scripture. They will call it genius. You will call it survival. They will call it chaos. You will call it the art of becoming. They will study the blueprint long after you've moved beyond it. Because the truth is, this isn't just a strategy. It is transform, not of victory, but of self. You turned pain into architecture, silence into power, waiting into weaponry. You became more than defense. You became the standard. You became the answer they didn't know they were looking for. And they will follow, quietly, desperately, trying to trace your steps without realizing they can't follow what isn't there to follow. You don't leave a trail. You leave a mark, one that can't be erased, one that becomes the code they live by without ever naming it. So stand in your silence, stand in your blueprint. Let them study you, let them call it chaos. You know the truth, you are not the subject of study. You are the standard.